This week, Urbeen is supposed to go back to college after summer vacation.
I don't think on in the future. I just want my family to be okay, sitting here for a drink.
As night falls, this family who lost everything offers me tea and gives thanks that they're alive. Lauren Freyer, NPR News in Amsmiz in the Atlas Mountains of Morocco.
The Food and Drug Administration has given the okay to a new round of vaccines against COVID-19. The shots will be available for anybody 6 months and older. Today, a federal advisory vaccine committee with the Centers for Disease Control is meeting to talk about the rollout of these boosters, which could be available in pharmacies later this week. NPR's Maria Godoy tells us more about them.
The newest COVID boosters are updated versions of the Moderna and Pfizer-BioNTech vaccines. They're designed to target a relatively recent Omicron subvariant called XBB.1.5. But since the FDA chose to target that strain, other subvariants have become more prevalent. Andrew Pekosh is a virologist at Johns Hopkins. He says the new boosters are a close enough match that they should offer protection against these variants too.
So when you get vaccinated, the vast majority of the antibodies your body generates should cross-react to the variants that are circulating right now.
As we head into the winter with COVID cases rising, the question is, who should get the boosters? Today, the CDC's Vaccine Advisory Panel meets to answer that question. It's expected to make specific recommendations for who should get the shot. Experts agree the boosters are most critical for people aged 65 and older, those who are immunocompromised or have other underlying health conditions that put them at higher risk of severe disease from COVID. Here's immunologist John Moore from Weill Cornell Medical College.
If you are in poor health and have an acknowledged pre-existing condition that puts you at risk of severe COVID, then you are a priority group for getting an additional round of protection from a vaccine booster.
As for people who are young and otherwise healthy, while these groups are not considered to be at high risk of severe disease, many experts I spoke with say getting a booster is still a good idea. One of them is Dr. Preeti Malani, a professor of medicine at the University of Michigan.
From my standpoint, I feel that COVID boosters are a good thing for everyone. And the reasons are multiple. One of them is that even if you're not preventing illness, you're going to have milder illness in general.
And she says boosters may reduce the risk of passing on the virus to more vulnerable people. Moderna and Pfizer say they have ample supplies of their vaccines, which will probably be available later this week. But it's not clear how many people will actually opt to get the new boosters. The vast majority of Americans never got the last one. Maria Godoy, NPR News.
Coming up this afternoon on All Things Considered, President Biden often declares his support for unions, but the United Auto Workers is not returning the love right now. To hear the story, stream NPR on your smartphone or computer or listen on the radio. This is NPR News.
Good morning. It's 8:19. This is 91.7 WVXU. If members of the UAW strike, it will affect more than automakers. We'll hear from a professor of global supply chain at Wayne State University in Detroit. That story in 15 minutes on 91.7 WVXU. This traffic report supported by Unbound.org. Northbound 75 at Town, the left lane blocked by a wreck. Traffic stop and go from Mitchell. Southbound 71 at 275 in Ohio, the wreck's been cleared. Traffic, though, still stop and go from Western Road. Southbound 7175 at Buttermilk, a broken down vehicle on the right shoulder. Southbound 275 after State Route 28 Milford, a wreck on the left shoulder. 9 first morning weather, scattered showers, cooler today, the high 74. 65 now in Cincinnati.
Support comes from Norwood Together and its second International Art Show celebrating Welcoming America Week. The event showcases the creative work of international and local artists, live music, children's area market, international food trucks, and cider. Saturday, September 16th, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Presenting sponsor, Hamilton County. To learn more, visit norwoodtogether.org.
Support comes from the UC Office of Research presenting DF Go 2.0, an open house celebration of UC Digital Futures open to the public September 22nd from noon to 3, featuring cutting-edge tech demos, food trucks, live music, and the United States of Artificial Intelligence, a panel discussing the perils and promise of AI. More at ucdigitalfutures.com.
You know what shows and movies like Barbie, The Office, Parks and Rec, Curb Your Enthusiasm, Arrested Development, The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and Superbad all have in common? The actors for those shows were cast by Allison Jones. She's widely credited with discovering talent that ushered in a new era of comedy. She joins us on the next Fresh Air.
Fresh Air starts at 1 o'clock this afternoon on 91.7 WVXU. It's 8:21.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Bank of America, offering access to resources and digital tools designed to help local to global companies make moves for their businesses. Learn more at bankofamerica.com/bankingforbusiness. From Procter & Gamble, maker of Metamucil, a fiber supplement containing psyllium, a plant-based fiber for trapping and removing waste in the digestive system, designed to be taken every day. More at metamucil.com. From Organic Valley, a farmer-owned cooperative dedicated to providing ethically sourced food from small organic family farms across the country. Learn more at ov.coop/ethically sourced. And from the Doris Duke Foundation.
It's Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Michelle Martin.
And I'm Steve Inskeep. Some of the highest paid people in this country seem to have trouble walking away from their jobs. We've recently seen Bob Iger returning to Disney. Michael Dell is back at Dell Inc. and Howard Schultz is leading Starbucks again. One reason is that these so-called boomerang CEOs are not planning for their own succession. Our colleague Layla Fadl spoke about this with Cindy Solomon, an executive leadership expert and author.
Well, I think there's a couple of reasons, and I think the boomerang really epitomizes the issues around succession planning in large organizations right now. My experience with the work that we do is that large organizations really stop investing in leadership development in those C-suite levels, which is what then leads to a lack of true bench strength, both when it comes to promotions into this level and certainly when it comes to replacing a CEO. I think the perception is that by the time you reach that C-suite level, you really should have all the skills you need, and by golly, if you don't let on or certainly ask for help. And I think it's this lack of leadership skill and focus on building those basic leadership and communication skills that leads to the lack of bench strength when it is time for that CEO to move on.
But why aren't they thinking in that long-term way about identifying and training successors so that a new generation can take the reins?
I think it's more schoolyard than corporate boardroom. I mean, the process of really building your successor at that CEO level, it requires a subjugation of your own ego to the needs of the organization. And if a CEO wants their successor to be successful after they depart, they really have to turn over the keys to the kingdom, if you will. They have to let their successor in on the secrets of things that only they know about. At the C-suite level, you really don't get experience in how to manage a board or how to deal with their largest shareholders. And I think particularly, and I'm going to say something provocative here, but particularly male CEOs have a particularly difficult time letting go of those reins.
And so what you're saying is they can't put their egos in check to let somebody else shine.
Absolutely. Every female CEO that I can think of, particularly in the Fortune 500, that has needed a succession plan and executed one, has been really successful doing it.
So what happens to a company when its top leader stays in a position for so long? What happens if that change just doesn't occur?
Any bench strength that you did have below you in that C-suite, they leave for other opportunities. So those that believe they are ready or certainly want to take on that task, if they don't see any headroom above them, any movement in that CEO level, they depart for other opportunities. So now you've already lost the cream at the top of the barrel for that CEO role. The outside world changes dramatically as well. And maybe the skills that it took you to be a fantastic CEO 10, 15, 20 years ago don't translate when the world has changed so dramatically around you. But if you look at the boards, they're in the same position.
The stability of it all, is that what appeals to boards and shareholders? Do they see that as a benefit?
I think the reality is that they're just comfortable. They're comfortable with the way this person leads. They're not challenged with new ideas or innovative thinking. So change is hard, and I think it's frightening, particularly for those long-term board members who are used to doing things a certain way.
You know, it's interesting because I feel like we can take this conversation we're having about executives and apply it elsewhere in the country right now, namely politics between older presidential candidates, members of Congress. I mean, does this succession issue go beyond the boardroom?
You know, you look at some of these folks creating laws around family leave or health care, etc. When they're in their 70s and 80s, they have no conscious memory of what it's like to be in those positions or in those roles. And I think you can say the same thing about the boardroom and about those C-suite executives.
Cindy Solomon is an executive leadership expert and author. Thank you so much, Cindy, for your time.
Twinkie maker Hostess Brands is being bought by J.M. Smucker as it spreads its peanut butter and jelly empire. The value of the deal is a lip-smacking $5.6 billion. NPR's Alina Selyer has this report.
The All-American Twinkie has been giving children a sugar rush for nearly 100 years now.
It's Twinkie the Kid! Howdy, partners! Come on to Hostess Twinkie Town.
This year, J.M. Smucker, which sells jellies, Jif peanut butter, and Folgers coffee, reportedly had to fight off big rivals like Pepsi and Cheerios maker General Mills to scoop up Hostess Brands. And the most remarkable part of the story is that Hostess has gone through bankruptcy not once, but twice in 20 years. In 2004, it blamed the low-carb diet trend. In 2012, it blamed its union contracts. The Twinkie production abruptly stopped.
It was a run on tasty treats as people scrambled to get the last Twinkies off those store shelves.
Hostess broke up into bits, and its snacking cakes business was sold to investors for just over $400 million. Twinkies came back, and now, 10 years later, Smucker is buying Hostess for more than 13 times that amount.
It's the power of brands. People like their Twinkies. People like their Hostess cupcakes.
Josh Sosland is the editor of Milling and Baking News magazine, which has covered Hostess for almost a century, as it made rolls and Wonder Bread, and in 1930 introduced the Twinkie. Now it also makes ding-dongs, popos, zingers, lately trying to venture out into sugar-free cookies, caffeinated donuts, and Twinkies flavored with pumpkin spice. Its stock price more than doubled in recent years as people spent more on snacks thanks to hearty demand and higher prices. Sales have slipped a bit lately, but Sosland says,
honestly, demand for snack products is pretty resilient and has been for the last 20 years.
And he says in the snack cake business that does not see a ton of drama, the Hostess turnaround has been impressive, with its new price tag a pretty sweet deal. Alina Salud, NPR News.
This is NPR News.
When climate disasters happen, lives can be lost and homes destroyed, but we can also lose important pieces of our cultural heritage. Those can be buildings or artifacts, but also a lot more.
What makes a thing heritage are the values that we ascribe to it. Its knowledge, its stories, its practices, its language.
The impact of climate change on cultural heritage on the next All Things Considered from NPR News.
All Things Considered comes your way this afternoon at 4 o'clock until 6:30 with Bill Reinhardt on 91.7 WVXU.
few scattered showers moving through. Cooler today, the high 74. It's 65.
Support comes from Dayton Performing Arts Alliance and its season opening celebration, Prince Orlovsky's Grand Masquerade, as Dayton Opera, Ballet, and Philharmonic unite to bring Act 2 of Johann Strauss II's Die Fledermaus to life. Performances September 16th and 17th. Information and tickets at DaytonPerformingArts.org/tickets.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Janine Hurst. Congress is up against the clock to come up with a government spending bill by the end of this month. NPR's Windsor Johnston reports House lawmakers are returning from their August recess today.
The Senate got back to work last week on legislation to keep federal agencies funded through the next fiscal year and are getting closer to bringing legislation to the floor. Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is urging the House to work quickly and in a bipartisan way.
I implore House Republicans to follow the Senate's example. Reject unrealistic extreme demands. Don't let 30 people way out on the extreme dictate what the House does.
Some Republican hardliners have been pushing for deep cuts in government spending, and that's likely to complicate the process in the House. Without a deal, parts of the government could shut down on October 1st. Windsor Johnston, NPR News, Washington.
The White House has cleared the way for the release of 5 Americans held in Iran by issuing a blanket waiver for international banks to transfer $6 billion in frozen Iranian money without fear of U.S. sanctions. It means European, Middle Eastern, and Asian banks wouldn't violate U.S. sanctions in converting the frozen money that's sitting in South Korea, which is to be used for the purchase of humanitarian goods. U.S. futures contracts are trading lower at this hour. You're listening to NPR News from Washington.
Good morning. It's 8:32, 65 degrees in Cincinnati. This is 91.7 WVXU. I'm Marianne Zalesnik. The Cincinnati Public School Board approved the district's fiscal year budget last night. Final budget totals over $609 million. That's $1 million more than the initial budget the superintendent proposed, since it's putting more money into its preschools. This year, the district says it's focusing on student engagement by hiring more counselors and adding new positions like graduation counselors and attendance social workers. CPS is also bringing in more assistant principals to its schools. Superintendent Ironetta Wright says the changes are designed to improve the district's graduation and attendance rates. The board voted unanimously to approve the new budget. A grant from the U.S. Department of Agriculture could help Ohio and other Midwest states produce more seafood. The money will fund 5 years of research into making aquaponics facilities more profitable. The Ohio Newsroom's Kendall Crawford reports.
Aquaponics is a method of raising fish and plants together in tanks of water. The fish waste helps feed the plants, and the plants clean the water for the fish. It produces more food with 90% less water than traditional soil farming. Mike McGraw runs Root House Aquaponics in Southwest Ohio. He says more research needs to be done to give facilities like his a more viable path forward.
Us farmers who are doing this 7 days a week, we're not getting rich off of it. And so it kind of ties our hands to finding more technical ways to do it better.
Purdue University researchers will look at new potential revenue streams for aquaponics and how to make them more efficient, including by seeing if fish waste could be processed into a biogas to help power the system. For the Ohio Newsroom, I'm Kendall Crawford.
Macy's Brothers is debuting a new look this week. The ice cream shop and candies purveyor is rebranding with an updated look at its flagship shop in Oakley and new logos for its products. General Manager Christy Wiseman says the new lettering is striking and easier to read than the previous cursive logo.
Aglamesis is a very hard Greek name to pronounce anyway, so adding that cursive to it, if you don't know the name, you might never figure out what it is. So this still is a very nice nostalgic font, but it's very clear and bold and refreshed, I think.
Weisman says the one thing that isn't changing is the well-known pink color scheme. After a day off yesterday, the Reds opened a 3-game series in Detroit tonight against the Tigers.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Ooma, a cloud-based phone service for any size business with an automated virtual receptionist, video meetings, and other features to connect to customers and coworkers anywhere at ooma.com/NPR. From American Jewish World Service, supporting human rights advocates worldwide in the fight for democracy, equity, and justice for all people. Learn more at ajws.org. And from the sustaining members of this NPR station.
Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Michelle Martin.
And I'm Steve Inskeep. The Detroit 3 automakers are locked in a contract dispute with workers, and a strike deadline is Thursday, a minute before midnight. If the industry should shut down, even for a brief period, it means huge losses for the automakers. But what happens to businesses up and down the supply chain, the auto parts industry? Jeff Reitmer is following that part of the story. He's a professor of global supply chain at Wayne State University of Detroit. Welcome.
Thank you.
I guess we should mention this is your business. A car that is made by a Detroit company may be built in several countries all over the world. Isn't that right?
That is correct. All the way from thinking I just bought a Ford that was built in Hermosillo, Mexico. And you have part suppliers that are down in Mexico, so it is truly a global industry.
Okay, so do you anticipate a strike that would disrupt that entire network this week?
Beginning the week, yes, but then I have seen these negotiations go 24 hours and you come up with an agreement at the end of the week. I still think they will strike one of the Detroit 3.
One of the Detroit 3? You don't think that they will all end up on the same page?
No. Normally you want to be the first one to get the deal done, and then that's kind of the pattern for the rest of the industry, and UAW is kind of throwing that out the window this year.
Well, let's talk through the implications of that then. Let's say that at least one company faces a strike at the end of the week. What does that mean for all of the other companies that serve GM or Ford or Stellantis or are dependent on them in some way?
The tier ones or the top level suppliers, they'll probably have taken measures already, cut discretionary spending, for example. But the longer it goes on, they could start running into furloughs and things like that. What it really hits are the lower level suppliers, the 2s, the 3s. They're typically much smaller, maybe even family run, and the margins are razor thin. So a disruption really throws them into a turmoil, and you could see possibly some of them just close up shop and liquidate.
I'm now curious if these big 3 companies share suppliers to the extent where a strike against one of the big 3 might disrupt business and supplies to the other 2.
Yes, they do. I was working on my dissertation in 2007 and 2008. Chrysler at that point had to declare their top 100 suppliers. 90% of those suppliers served at least one of the other 2 Detroit 3, and then 80% probably throughout the supply chain for all of the automakers, transplants included.
What does the GM strike in 2019, I believe, tell us about the potential damage this time?
I believe it cost GM about $1 billion. And what was interesting about that was they didn't strike every GM plant. They struck a transmission plant, and that shut down the whole company, which could be a possible tactic this time.
We just got a few seconds left, but does the potential, very real transition to electric vehicles complicate things even further if there's a strike?
Yes, exactly. You don't have as many parts in an electric vehicle.
Oh.
And you need less workers.
Okay, so that might be part of what the tension is here between the GM workers, or rather all the big 3 automakers workers and the companies themselves.
Yes, that's correct.
Jeff Reitmer is a professor of global supply chain at Wayne State University, Detroit. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
The U.S. House returns from recess today, and Speaker Kevin McCarthy is once again under pressure from all sides in his own party.
Congress has a lot to do. It needs to pass spending bills to avoid a government shutdown. President Biden wants more aid for Ukraine and disaster relief for states, and the most right-wing Republicans want McCarthy to resist the White House or risk his job.
Meanwhile, moderates in McCarthy's caucus worry he will give in to the far right on spending levels and on green-lighting an impeachment inquiry into President Biden. So where does this internal fight leave the House GOP weeks away from a potential government shutdown? Politico's Sarah Ferris has been covering this story, and she's with us now. Good morning.
Good morning.
So government funding expires September 30th. Congress needs to pass its spending bills before then, or the government would shut down. Just as briefly as you can, Sarah, what are the sticking points?
Well, there are plenty of them, but the biggest disagreement so far is that Republicans and Democrats have not decided on how much to actually spend. The hardliners in the Republican conference want to cut over $100 billion from the spring's debt deal that McCarthy and Biden have already agreed to. But it's a lot more than that, though. A lot of these conservatives have had 6 weeks away from the Capitol to talk to each other, toughen their positions, and they say they haven't heard a whole lot from leadership.
Do the hardline members, the most hardline members, have any specific kind of bottom line, red line, or whatever you want to call it?
Well, they want McCarthy to stand up to Democrats on spending, on border demands, on slashing money from the Department of Justice as it investigates former President Donald Trump, and they don't think that Republicans should fear a shutdown. And several of them told me that most people wouldn't notice if the government did shut down for a couple of days. And they're really not talking subtly about what will happen to McCarthy if he doesn't meet their expectations, which means they are willing to go after his job.
What do you think McCarthy thinks about all this?
Well, I've been given spending for about 9 years on Capitol Hill. I've never quite seen a situation this primed for a shutdown because there really is no way to keep the government open if you're refusing to work with Democrats. Some McCarthy supporters have even privately told us they think the only way out of this is by shutting down the government, showing the conservatives that he's willing to fight for them, even if there isn't a clear path to reopening it.
But isn't there a cost to that for the Republicans and for McCarthy?
Of course, and I think most of the Republican conference knows that. Most of them have been here before, have seen these fights before, have lived through shutdowns and taken the blame for it. So a lot of those are ready for McCarthy to stand up to the hardliners, not the Democrats. They're tired of being held hostage to this small group.
It took McCarthy 15 rounds of votes just to become Speaker. How has he managed to hold on this long?
He's held on a lot longer than even his critics have been pretty mystified at his ability to do so. I think he's someone who survives until tomorrow. This is what he's really good at. He has this persistence of winning over his critics. He has a lot of allies in the party that have kept him alive. And the question is whether this will continue through one of the biggest fights that we've seen this year.
That is Sarah Harris. Oh, Sarah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
NPR News.
Good morning. It's 8:43. This is 91.7 WVXU. Alphabet Google is in federal court today for the start of a big antitrust trial. The government alleges Google is using its position to stifle competition in search. Also, local communities across the country have had to get creative, looking for ways to revitalize local economies. You'll hear more about one mill town in New England. It's transforming its downtown area with investment in the arts. Those stories in 10 minutes on 91.7 WVXU. Northbound 75 at town, the left lane's blocked by a wreck. Traffic is stop and go from Mitchell. Southbound 7175 at Buttermilk Pike, broken down vehicle on the right shoulder. Northbound 75 at 675 in the Dayton area, a wreck on the exit ramp. Northbound 75 after State Route 73, the left lane blocked by a wreck. Southbound 75 at Western Avenue Finley, a broken down vehicle blocking the right lane. Eastbound 275 at Madison Pike, the left lane blocked by a wreck. Southbound 275 after State Route 28 Milford, a wreck on the left shoulder. And westbound 275 at Price Road, a wreck on the right shoulder.
WVXU's Democracy and Me blog has a variety of resources and lesson plans to help high school social studies teachers in the classroom. Check it out at democracyandme.org.
Support comes from Columbia Acura, offering a complete selection of new and pre-owned luxury cars. Columbia Acura's new vehicle lineup and professional staff are available to serve you on Montgomery Road at I-275. More information at 530-0100 or ColumbiaAcura.com. Columbia Acura, precision-crafted performance.
I'm Ann Thompson. Every day there are countless science and technology stories just waiting to be told. I look forward to discovering them and introducing you to the people who can explain how these stories might affect you and your family. Join me for Focus on Technology every Monday during Morning Edition and All Things Considered.
and I'm your midday host on 91.7 WVXU. 9 morning weather. Rain moving through the area this morning. Mostly scattered showers. It's cooler. Our high today, 74. A little bit of rain possible yet tonight. Mostly cloudy otherwise. The low 54 and partly cloudy tomorrow. The high 74. Right now it's 65 degrees in Cincinnati at 8:45.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Yarl and Pamela Moe, focusing on civil liberties, foster youth, public radio, and the arts. From the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, supporting efforts to promote a just, equitable, and sustainable society in its hometown of Flint and communities around the world. More at mott.org. And from the William T. Grant Foundation, supporting research to improve the lives of young people at wtgrantfdn.org.
This is Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Michelle Martin.
And I'm Steve Inskeep. As the climate changes, places where home air conditioning used to be rare are seeing a need for artificial cooling. It's a new expense that is hard for people in low-income housing. Montana Public Radio's Aaron Bolton reports.
On a summer day with temperatures pushing into the 90s, Heather Ronnie's two kids eagerly lined up for the ice cream truck.
I've seen it driving down the road and they're freaking out.
They're in Columbia Falls, Montana, about 20 miles southwest of Glacier National Park. In August, several Montana cities set daily high temperature records. It was the hottest month on record in parts of Washington and Oregon, too. This after hundreds in the region died from heat-related causes in 2021 and 2022. Most died in homes without air conditioning. This summer, Ronnie had to take her 3-year-old son to the emergency room because it was so hot in her apartment.
All of a sudden he was throwing up and very tired. I took him in immediately.
Nationwide, more than 500,000 public and low-income housing units like Ronnie's don't have AC. The Pew Research Center's Drew DeSilver says a lot of them are in the Rockies or Pacific Northwest.
So a lot of those places, they didn't really need air conditioning, and so a lot of homes just didn't come with air conditioning.
Lots of low-income people use vouchers from the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, to help pay their rent. But while HUD requires housing and funds to provide heat, it doesn't have dedicated funding to install AC in low-income housing. Requiring AC would be challenging. HUD declined to make someone available for an interview on the topic, but has said it's contemplating a cooling requirement. Public housing infrastructure is already crumbling, with various estimates putting the maintenance backlog at roughly $80 billion. Bridget Simmons is with the National Housing Law Project.
So that's why this concern about financially how does it get done is a big concern.
Lots of states have assistance programs to help people with low incomes pay their heating bills, but that kind of help for cooling is rare. And it's not just a matter of comfort. Low-income and rural Americans are more likely to have health conditions that make them susceptible to heat, says Dr. Lori Byron with the group Montana Health Professionals for a Healthy Climate.
People with multiple medical problems and chronic disease and diabetes, they are more likely to die in a heat wave, especially if they don't have access to cool air.
Analysis from the place with the most heat-related deaths in America, the Phoenix metro area, found that the majority of people who died indoors from heat last summer were in dwellings without working air conditioning. Authorities in Arizona have been setting up public cooling centers to reduce heat-related deaths. Byron says they're needed here in Montana now, too.
Cooling centers, there aren't really any set up yet.
Inside Heather Ronnie's apartment in Columbia Falls, her kids are devouring their ice cream treats. Ronnie, who works as a housekeeper, says she was able to afford a swamp cooler, which cools the air through evaporation. It hasn't helped much. She wanted to buy a cheap window air conditioner, but those aren't allowed.
I thought it was ridiculous because we all have children here and it is like a hot box up here.
She says if she got help to install AC, she'd be happy to cover the extra utilities. She says that would surely be cheaper than another ER visit for her youngest child. For NPR News, I'm Aaron Bolton in Columbia Falls, Montana.
This is Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Michelle Martin.
And I'm Steve Inskeep.
It's 8:50. Good morning. This is 91.7 WVXU. In 10 minutes, it's time for the BBC NewsHour. Another tragedy in North Africa. This time in Libya, where thousands are feared dead after a storm causes severe flooding. Also, the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is in Russia to meet President Putin. What's in it for both men? And we'll hear from the lyricist Bernie Taupin, Elton John's songwriting partner for more than half a century. It all starts at 9.
Support comes from the CET Action Auction. Online bidding is now open with the final items closing on Sunday, September 17th. All proceeds from the auction support your local PBS station. For auction details, view items up for bid, and place bids to help ensure CET programs and services continue. Visit cetconnect.org/auction.
I'm Lucy May. On the next Cincinnati edition, the new COVID boosters are on their way, just as a wave in cases has hit as the season for peak respiratory illnesses approaches. We'll discuss how well the booster will protect against the new variant and what vaccines you should get this fall. Plus, we'll explore how patriarchies became embedded in societies around the world. Today at noon on Cincinnati Edition on 91.7 WVXU.
Local support for Marketplace Morning Report comes from Bartlett Wealth Management. Wealth management takes time. Time that can be better spent managing a business. The experienced team at Bartlett helps cut through the noise of a complex financial situation so clients can focus on what they manage best, their businesses. More at Bartlett1898.com.
What's it take to fix Main Street?
Marketplace Morning Report is supported by the Financial Times, whose distinctive pink pages have reported U.S. news for over 130 years. There's more at fearlesslypink.com. And by C3 AI. C3 Generative AI provides ChatGPT enterprise search that is verifiable, secure, and accurate across all enterprise data. C3.ai. This is Enterprise AI.
I'm David Brancaccia. First, in a case harkening back to the great Microsoft Internet browser fight of the 1990s, Alphabet Google is in federal court today for the start of a big antitrust trial. The government alleges Google is using its position to stifle competition for online searches.
The Justice Department says Google pays billions of dollars a year to manufacturers of devices like smartphones to make it the default browser. Justice lawyers also point out that Google requires its search engine be bundled into its Android software. The government says that gives Google an unfair advantage. Google says people use it because, quote, they choose to. And Justice filed a second case against Google earlier this year, accusing it of dominating online advertising. Groups of state attorneys general are also suing Google. I'm Nancy Marshall-Genzer for Marketplace.
S&P and NASDAQ futures are both down 0.2%. Apple stocks up 0.4% ahead of its iPhone 15 reveal today. You'll be able to borrow your pal's Android charger for it.
Marketplace Morning Report is supported by VantageScore. VantageScore credit scoring models are used by over 3,000 banks and fintechs, including 9 of the top 10. Learn how VantageScore helps expand financial inclusion by leveraging predictive analytics at VantageScore.com. And by Amazon Business, helping provide a smarter, easier way to get the supplies businesses need to thrive. Amazon Business, your partner for smart business buying.
Coming out of the great financial crisis, I did a documentary exploring better ideas for the economy. For a taste of problems looking for solutions, we opened that film, Fixing the Future. It was called In a New England Mill Town Littered with Closed Factories. It's been years since the economy emptied out on us, and I've been waiting for the boats to rise again ever since. There I was, peering into a clothing store that had sat empty for 15 years. The Hathaway shirt, Scott paper jobs were gone, and big boxes had sucked retail out to near the I-95 interchanges. I knew this because this was my hometown, Waterville, on the Kennebec River in Maine. That was 2010. Same block a dozen years later stands a new $26 million hotel, the Lockwood. The bar off the lobby looks like it was barged up the river intact from Manhattan. private hotel chains were not spending on this stretch of Main Street that time forgot, then who?
One of the beauties of it being a college that's been around for 200 years and we expect will be around for 200 years more is that we can be the ultimate patient investor. And we can wait.
David A. Green is president of Colby, a liberal arts college that shares the zip code.
We can invest in this, not for profit, but we can do this in a way that helps to stimulate something better for the community. And having a great city is good for Colby, it's good for Waterville.
Here's where I disclose I've long known Colby. My late dad was a literature professor there for decades.
There's a couple $100 million in reinvestment in just these 4 blocks of Main Street.
Colby ponied up half. The other half comes from the Harold Alfond Foundation with roots in Maine. Individuals and the feds also chipped in. Across from the hotel long gone Waterville Hardware is now artist studios and makerspace. A few paces north, this extravaganza, what planners see as a cultural living room.
A place where people, it is completely okay to go for a cup of coffee, completely okay to go in and, make ceramics, or completely okay to go and see a movie.
Jacqueline Terraza is director of the famed Colby College Museum of Art up on campus, which has opened an outpost here, part of a brand new arts center on Main Street. The museum is adjacent to an art house movie theater with 3 screens, all connected by skywalk to the historic Opera House. Robin Samalas-Getchell runs the florist shop in the old Waterville Savings Bank building. Moving here, her sales went up 93%.
Any sort of sunny, beautiful summer day, there are tons of people walking on Main Street, having lunch, stopping in, getting a coffee next door. You could look out and feel like maybe you're in the city for a couple of minutes.
The college bought this building and is Robin's landlord. Non-profits are tax exempt, but Colby pledged to keep what it owns downtown on the tax rolls, increasing tax revenue for the city 7-fold.
That is an annuity for the city. That makes such a big difference for the public schools that are here, for the social service organizations that are here.
There's demand for these services. The typical household earns just $41,000 a year, and revitalization has winners and losers. If property values rise, it's great if you're selling or borrowing against the property, but maybe not if you're staying put, paying more tax. Also, housing affordability. It can drive rents higher, but persuade developers to build more housing. The college's role here plays into town versus gown friction. Colby's worked to ease this by building one of its dorms downtown, where students have to give back to the community through volunteering. Still, some residents now call downtown not Waterville, but Colbyville.
Colbyville.
You've heard that?
Yeah, all the time.
Ken Vlodick is owner of a vibrant sewing store, Yard Goods. It's fine with the hotel and the arts, but not with the college being such a power player, even with city officials and philanthropies so involved.
It was a great investment. But when somebody says Colby College invested over $100 million in downtown, I look at it as they didn't invest a cent in downtown. What they invested in was a extension of the Colby College campus, which is what we have.
Vlodick's overriding issue is what the Main Street dorm has done to parking. He feels frustrated in his campaign to get local authorities to beef up enforcement of student cars. Nearer the river, a shuttered tavern, once famous for characters inside and brawls outside, is about to get the wrecking ball. A private developer likes the town's new energy and will build stores and apartments. President Green sees a tipping point.
In the end, you can't have a project like this that is upheld entirely by a place like Colby or philanthropic money or anything else. You have to have the market at work.
There are data on possible returns on investment when communities like Waterville bet on the arts. More on that tomorrow. I'm David Brancaccio. This is the Marketplace Morning Report. From APM, American Public Media.
Good morning. It's a minute before 9 o'clock. This is 91.7 WVXU BBC News Hour. Coming up next, with rain moving through cooler conditions today, it's 65.
Support comes from Matinee Musicale, Cincinnati, presenter of classical recitals for more than a century. Pianist Sarah Donishmore performed Sunday, September 17, 3 p.m. at Memorial Hall. An international competition award winner, she recently joined the CCM faculty. The New York Concert Review applauds her blazing technique, power, expressivity, and imagination. For details, visit matineemusicalecincinnati.org.
Support comes from Robinson Sotheby's International Realty, bringing decades of local real estate expertise backed by the power of Sotheby's International Realty's global network and innovative marketing solutions. Whether buying or selling a home, their advisors like Sean Shimura are committed to the belief that luxury is an experience, not a price point.
91.7 WVXU Cincinnati and 88.5 WMUB Oxford. News from Cincinnati Public Radio and NPR.
Welcome to News Hour from the BBC World Service. Hello, I'm James Menendez. Thousands of people are feared dead and many more are missing after floodwaters swept through Derna in eastern Libya.
A massive neighborhood has been destroyed. A large number of victims. It's a calamity by all means.
For the first time in the history of the Israeli state, all 15 Supreme Court justices have convened to hear appeals against the government's attempt to restrict their power. The North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is in Russia's Far East en route to a meeting with President Putin. There's an arms deal on the table. And how one of the most enduring partnerships in pop is still standing.
We don't live in each other's pocket, but there's an intense love between the two of us.
So what is Elton and Bernie's secret? All of that and more coming up after the news.
Hello, this is Julie Candler with the BBC News. There's growing concern over the scale of loss of life in eastern Libya after a devastating storm. Estimates of the number of dead continue to vary, but more than 1,000 bodies are reported to have been recovered in the port city of Derna alone. With more details, here's Lena Sinjar.
The Red Crescent says the number believed to be missing across the country has increased to around 10,000. The health system in Libya has crumbled over past decades after the uprising that left the country divided into separately governed east and west. The internationally recognized government in Tripoli does not control eastern areas most affected by the storm.
The Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies have launched an emergency appeal to support victims of Friday's earthquake in Morocco. The Director of Operations said the Federation wanted to raise over $110 million for the most pressing needs, such as water, sanitation and shelter. At least 2,800 people were killed by the quake, most in remote villages in the Atlas Mountains. There have been tense exchanges during an unprecedented hearing involving all 15 members of Israel's Supreme Court on a key part of the government's judicial overhaul. The Member of Parliament who helped draw up the legal challenges said the court risked undermining democracy. The Chief Justice said the court was addressing the public's vital interests. The reforms have led to months of protests across Israel. These people in Jerusalem gave their views.
I believe in the democracy, and I think that this is one of the important fights to keep the democracy in Israel and to delete those silly laws that the Knesset, the parliament, voted for.
It is absolutely unconscionable that a democratically elected government in Israel should be dictated to by this court. Absolutely outrageous.
The United Nations has warned of a human rights crisis in Afghanistan 2 years after the Taliban returned to power. In a new report, the UN said the de facto leaders had imposed what it called a systematic assault on the rights and freedoms of the population. The High Commissioner for Human Rights urged the Taliban to bring Afghanistan back to international order.
Human rights in Afghanistan are in a state of collapse, acutely affecting the lives of millions of women, men, girls and boys. The shocking level of oppression of Afghan women and girls is immeasurably cruel. Afghanistan has set a devastating precedent as the only country in the world where women and girls are denied access to secondary and higher education.
World News from the BBC.
Good morning. It's 9:04, 65 degrees in Cincinnati, 67 in Dayton. This is 91.7 WVXU. I'm Marianne Selesnik. A new study shows there are still racial and gender disparities when it comes to the firms the city of Cincinnati hires. WVXU's Nick Swartzel has more.
About 5% of the city of Cincinnati's spending with contractors, think construction firms, architects, material suppliers, goes to businesses owned by women or minorities. Atlanta consultancy Griffin & Strong Senior Director Michelle Clark-Jenkins told a council committee the proportion is low, given the number of those firms in Hamilton County.
We found that the disparities remained after we controlled for those race and gender neutral factors.
A previous report for 2015 found similar disparities in city contracting. In response, the city created the Department of Economic Inclusion, which has been working to make sure there's more diversity in who wins city contracts. Some things have gotten better. The Griffin & Strong report says the city increased spending with women and minority-owned subcontractors by more than $40 million since the 2015 study. The Department of Economic Inclusion is adjusting some policies in response to the new report. Nick Swartzel, 91.7 WVXU.
Newport's taken another step to increase walkability and get people outside. The City Commission's approved a new ordinance allowing bars and restaurants to offer outdoor dining in residential neighborhoods. Assistant City Manager John Hayden says other changes could be coming.
This is one thing we're doing. We're looking at doing a what's called in Cincinnati known as a DORA, and look at some areas that we're going to do that to allow people some more mobility and try to encourage people to check out other places.
DORA stands for Designated Outdoor Refreshment Area and is in place at the banks. Hayden says Newport has had a sidewalk dining program in the Main Street corridor since the late 90s, but as more and more businesses opened, the city has had requests to expand it into residential areas. Reds at Detroit tonight.
Hello and welcome to Newshour from the BBC World Service. We're coming to you live from London. I'm James Menendez. Emergency teams from North Africa and beyond are being sorely tested right now. On Monday we heard about the aftermath of the devastating earthquake in Morocco. We'll be getting an update on that in about 10 minutes. But another tragedy struck the region on Monday morning. A powerful storm, Storm Daniel, swept through eastern Libya, carrying huge amounts of rainfall. That was damaging enough in itself, but the deluge caused 2 dams to burst, and that torrent ripped through the port of Derna, wiping out, by one estimate, a quarter of the city. This resident, Ahmed, described what had happened.
People started telling one another the waters were rising and got a sense of impending danger. Those in the valley started moving to higher ground. People realized the dam was compromised. From about 3 a.m. on Monday, the dam breached. If the dam wasn't there in the first place, the floodwaters would have flowed quite naturally and lightly. But it was the dam breaching that caused the damage. Unfortunately, when people came out of their houses and got into their cars, the water came rushing through and all were washed away.
Thousands of people are feared dead, with many more still missing. Libya isn't well equipped to deal with such a disaster. Eastern Libya is ruled by one faction, while a fragile rival administration governs out of the capital Tripoli in the west. Hisham Shakwat is a minister in the Eastern government and a member of the emergency committee there. He was in Derna on Monday and told me about the impact of the storm.
It resulted in the collapse of one of the water dams located in the south of the city, dragging large parts of it into the sea, and resulted in a complete destruction of water networks, and the massive neighborhood has been vanished and destroyed. Large number of victims. The number is increasing each hour. It's a calamity by all means. The rescue workers are on the side. LNA, Libyan National Army, as well, are on the operation side. They are trying to rescue people. They are trying to collect whoever dragged into the sea.
Yeah, it is a terrible situation. And when I've looked at some of the pictures and some of the video, I mean, as you say, it looks like a whole chunk of the city has just been washed away.
Yes, we were there yesterday. We were shocked by the view. I mean, it's tsunami. As simple as that, it's tsunami, I cannot describe it because, I mean, I have never seen like this. So we made a call on international organizations and friendly countries to help and send expertise, rescue teams to help save what can be saved, So we are expecting some aids coming from Turkey, Egypt, UAE, Qatar, Italy.
Will you accept help from the government in Tripoli?
Yes, of course. We are having aids coming from the east side of Libya. Individuals came straight away to Derna from west parts of Libya to help their brothers and to offer them what they can offer. But the situation is mainly under the control and responsibility of our government, with the government which I'm representing.
Why did the dam, and is it one dam, because there are reports that two dams collapsed, why did they give way?
There is two dams actually. The first dam and the main dam, which is away from the Derna city, which is around 7 kilometers. The rainfall was massive, more than 200 millimeters that night. And to be honest, the dam has been not under maintenance for a while. It looks like it couldn't sustain the pressure of the water.
And is that partly, do you think, the fact that it hadn't been maintained recently, is that a result of all the political problems that Libya has been having, do you think?
I would guess yes.
Hisham Shakwata, Minister in the Eastern Government of Libya. Well, let's talk to the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. Tamar Ramadan is head of their delegation to Libya. He's currently in Tunis. And welcome to NewsHour, Mr. Ramadan. What's your assessment of this disaster?
Thank you for giving this opportunity to shed the light on this catastrophic disaster. Actually, it's a very large-scale disaster that requires all the support from the international community to the affected population. The numbers are massive. The humanitarian needs are very huge and way beyond the limits and the abilities of our colleagues on the ground, who are the Libyan Red Crescent Society, and also beyond the abilities of the government. I think that's why they have called for an international appeal for aid, calling all the partners, all the donors to refocus again on Libya during this hard time.
The numbers of dead and missing seem to vary wildly, understandably, I guess, given the nature of what's happened. What are the figures that you're getting?
Actually, our teams on the ground are still doing their assessment to come back to us with the final numbers. But for example, the number of missing people reported till the moment is around 10,000 persons. There are around 2,000 families who are internally displaced, and other thousands of numbers of families stranded and waiting to be evacuated from the affected areas. Not talking about the dead people, that is not really known. Their numbers are not really known for the moment, but maybe later at night when we receive the assessment report, we will have more definite numbers to share.
Yeah, I mean, it is a grim task and a difficult thing to talk about, but presumably retrieval of all the bodies must be a priority at the moment.
Actually, there are many priorities identified, of course, for the survivors. Health services are priorities. For those who lost their houses, shelter is a priority. And of course, for those who unfortunately lost their lives, treating their bodies in a dignified manner is a priority. And our teams on the ground are dealing with these identified priorities with the equipment and with the resources they have on the ground.
Are they presumably finding it difficult to operate, the teams that you do have there?
It is difficult because of many factors. One of them is the very large scale of the disaster. Second is the challenges in the affected cities themselves, like the access. As you heard from the previous speaker, the roads are damaged and the access to the affected areas are compromised. Also the communication, the electricity is cut, internet is cut, and the mobile network as well. So communication is added to the difficulty of the situation itself. If we add to all these the limited resources available in hands right now, it can give a picture on how difficult is the situation to manage.
Thank you very much indeed for that update. I'm sure we'll be in touch in the coming days. That was Tamer Ramadan, head of the delegation to Libya for the IFRC. Well, while Libya tries to deal with those terrible floods, the search for survivors of the earthquake in Morocco continues. The Red Cross and Red Crescent Society is appealing for more than $100 million to help provide basic supplies and shelter to those who've lost their homes in the disaster. The epicenter was in the Atlas Mountains in what was already a remote and underdeveloped region. Many of the roads there have been blocked by falling rocks, and getting help to where it's needed most has proved very difficult. From Morocco, my colleague James Copnell sent us this report.
Morning in Marrakesh, lovely sunny morning. We're in a small park on the outskirts of town, and all around me are people who have slept outdoors. They've made makeshift tents from blankets that they've hung from trees. See someone drinking an early morning cup of coffee. The earthquake was on Friday, but they're still too nervous to go back inside their homes. There have been aftershocks. There's still a lot of fear, and understandably so. So many people have lost their lives here.
Bouchra, je vis à Marrakech et j'ai 32 ans.
She says her name is Bouchra and she's from Marrakech and she's 32 years old.
Je dors à l'extérieur parce que tout simplement il y a eu le tremblement de terre et
She says she's sleeping outside because even though the earthquake happened 3 days ago, there's still the trauma from it, and there's just a real fear that something could happen, and it's too dangerous to stay inside, sleep inside. I mean, look, the conditions of sleeping out here in the night is not great. It's not particularly comfortable. It's cold. We're trying to comfort each other, but we're also aware that, you know, the situation for other people in parts of the country is much, much worse. We're really happy just to be alive.
And we're actually going to leave Marrakesh now. We're going to head out into the mountains towards the epicenter of the earthquake and find out how people are coping there. So we're driving past, landfall really, rocks that have tumbled down from a cliff face. Half the road has been blocked. We managed to edge our way past. Apparently this road had only just been opened up again to cars. We've just arrived in the town of Asni, perched in the hills. Straight away I can see a house that is really quite severely damaged, gaping holes in its facade. Looks a real mess, and just to my right several blue tents being put up to shelter people who have been affected by the earthquake here. This is Hussein, an old man dressed in white. He says he was asleep in bed when the earthquake struck. Now his house has a huge crack in it and he has to live out in the open. He says he hasn't received much help at all, really. Just a few people in the town brought some bread and some blankets. Some people, Hussein says, have received tents from the government, but he hasn't got one yet. He asked God to help him, and he asked people to help him get through this catastrophe. We are stuck in something of a traffic jam, believe it or not. Cars carrying help, food, and cooking oil, and so on.
Attends.
No. Oh, there we go.
Thank you.
We reached out to the Small Business Administration and they sent us a statement from SBA Administrator Isabella Casillas Guzman. She writes, quote, "The SBA is proud of our work to promote equity and level the playing field in federal procurement to attract a diverse supplier base and ensure competition, innovation, and performance. As we work with the Department of Justice to continue reviewing the district court's ruling and evaluating the next steps, the SBA and Biden-Harris administration remain committed to supporting this crucial program." I'm Jen White. You're listening to 1A. Now let's get back to our other guests. Lauren Weber is a workplace reporter at the Wall Street Journal, and Alvin Tillery is the director of the Center for the Study of Diversity and Democracy at Northwestern University. Lauren, how was this case different than the Supreme Court decision barring race-based admissions in higher education?
Well, in the education cases, the legal argument was that there is a benefit to, it's part of the educational experience. There are educational benefits to having a diverse student body. That was the basis that the Supreme Court had supported affirmative action in the past. Now, the cases that are targeting more business programs or corporate DEI programs are, they don't have, they have not had the legal basis to make that argument that we're creating an educational community or a community that benefits from diversity, even though there is plenty of research out there, certainly in terms of the workplace and corporate structures and things like that, that having a diverse workforce, having many points of view, many experiences represented, is good for your business, helps you serve your customers better, helps you engage your employees better.
We got this message from Stephanie, who writes, "The hedge fund created by black women to help black women is being sued for excluding non-white people. Private companies, no less. Didn't SCOTUS rule that private business can exclude who they like according to their beliefs?" Alvin?
No, SCOTUS has not ruled that. So there's still a presumption of equity in private contracting. You can give to charities that you want. They may be, well, at least for now. But as we've seen with your last guest, I mean, the court has shifted and they are just proclaiming things unconstitutional that formerly were normal, right? And so in the old days, you could give money to groups in a way that was, sort of based on your preferences, but could not be discriminatory.
So how are you advising companies and organizations you work with, Alvin, in light of this legal landscape? Because as you described it, there's tension in both directions.
Yes, so I'll remind your listeners that the reason that we put these programs in place in the first place wasn't because, all of the powerful men that control business and banking and every sector of our society said, oh, let's all of a sudden be nice to people of color and women. The laws changed with the great civil rights legislation of the 1960s and demanded a modicum of equity. What I would say to the
Also, I want to see how companies, how DEI programs evolve. I expect we're going to see more emphasis on people with disabilities, perhaps veterans, some of the other characteristics that DEI programs tend to look at. And, it'll be really interesting to see how they talk about race and gender in the future.
That's Wall Street Journal reporter Lauren Weber and Alvin Tillery of the Center for the Study of Diversity and Democracy at Northwestern University. Thanks to you both. Remember, you can always follow the show on Instagram at The1A Show. Today's producer was June Leffler. This program comes to you from WAMU, part of American University in Washington, distributed by NPR. I'm Jen White. Thanks for listening. Let's talk again tomorrow. This is 1A.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Workday, committed to helping organizations adapt to change, using real-time data to uncover insights, stay decision-ready, and prepare for whatever's next. The finance, HR, and planning system for a changing world. And from SmartMouth, committed to the prevention of bad breath for 24 hours with 2 rinses a day. Smart Mouth mouthwash can be found nationwide at drugstores, grocery stores, and supercenters, or at smartmouth.com.
The panic attacks. They can make their sufferers feel like they're going to die. Next time on 1A, ABC's chief national correspondent Matt Gutman shares his story. His new book looks at the science and treatment of an anxiety disorder that often goes undiagnosed, and how magic mushrooms and meditation have helped him heal.
Here's the forecast. Scattered showers and cooler today and a high of 74. Mostly cloudy tonight, a low 54. Tomorrow, below average and a high of 74 again.
Support for 91.7 WVXU comes from Kenton County Public Library. September is National Library Card Sign-Up Month. You can apply for your library card with a valid ID and proof of address at any of the 3 branches or online at kentonlibrary.org. That's kentonlibrary.org.
Support comes from Ensemble Theater Cincinnati, presenting What the Constitution Means to Me, September 9th through October 1st. This hilarious, hopeful new play breathes new life into the founding document and imagines how it could evolve to fit modern America. Tickets at ensemblecincinnati.org. Season sponsor is the LKC Foundation.
91.7 WVXU Cincinnati and 88.5 WMUB Oxford. The news from Cincinnati Public Radio and NPR.
Harvard-bred, author, health advocate, and former White House aide, Alejandra Campoverde is many things. Just don't call her a trailblazer. From WAMU and NPR in Washington, this is 1A. I'm Jen White. Today on 1A, a conversation with author Alejandra Campoverde. Brought up by a family of immigrants, her new memoir tracks her journey from LA, where she was raised by her single mom, to Harvard, and then to the White House, where she worked for President Obama. Now she's writing about some of the myths that haunt so many first-generation kids who strive for success. She joins us to talk about the challenges faced by those often described as first and onlys. But first, we take you to Morocco and the struggle to reach those still in need of relief. That's ahead after this news.
Live from NPR News, I'm Giles Snyder. Authorities in Pennsylvania say they are now pursuing escaped murderer Danilo Cavalcante in South Coventry Township outside Philadelphia. And State Police Lieutenant Colonel George Bivens is urging residents to lock their doors and secure their vehicles, because as of last night, Cavalcante is armed and dangerous.
At 10:10 p.m., a call was received from a resident on Coventryville Road indicating a short Hispanic male, no shirt, and wearing dark pants, had entered his garage while the homeowner was in it, and that he grabbed a .22 rifle that was leaning in the corner of the garage. The homeowner drew a pistol and fired at Cavalcante as he fled with the rifle.
Cavalcante has eluded capture since August 31st when he broke out of the Chester County Prison. A CDC Vaccine Advisory Committee meeting today to discuss the rollout of new COVID-19 boosters. The CDC must sign off following FDA approval of the new updated shots. Yes, big for anyone 6 months and older. Here's NPR's Maria Godoy.
The newest COVID boosters are updated versions of the Moderna and Pfizer-BioNTech vaccines. They're designed to target a relatively recent Omicron subvariant called XBB.1.5. But since the FDA chose to target that strain, other subvariants have become more prevalent. The FDA and vaccine makers say the new boosters are still a close enough match to circulating strains that they should still provide good protection against COVID. Recent studies support that. The CDC is likely to recommend the shots for anyone at high risk of severe disease from COVID. That includes older people and those who are immunocompromised or have other health problems. Maria Godoy, NPR News.
Overseas now to Morocco, where the earthquake death toll tops 2,900. Search teams working around the clock in hopes of finding and pulling survivors out of the rubble of mountain villages. NPR's Eleanor Beardsley is in the regional capital of Marrakesh, where she reports things appear almost normal.
Horse-drawn carriages carried tourists down palm-lined boulevards. Earthquake damage in Marrakesh was mostly confined to the historic neighborhoods in the center of the old town by the Medina. In the new part of town, businessman Yassine Ahmed stands by the shiny red Porsche that he rents by the hour to tourists who want to take a spin around Marrakesh. He says everybody knows Marrakesh is a tourist city, adding, "The quake is devastating and I'm praying for the victims, but this city and this country need tourism." Eleanor Beardsley, NPR News, Marrakesh.
In eastern Libya, the death toll expected to climb after heavy rainfall from the Mediterranean storm Daniel caused 2 dams to collapse. Hundreds reported dead in the city of Derna alone. You're listening to NPR News. The United Nations World Food Program has been sounding the alarm for months. Without more funding, it's being forced to drastically cut food rations to millions of the world's most vulnerable people this year. And here's our Petrard reports on the millions impacted by plummeting aid from donors.
The World Food Program has had to cut critical food assistance to millions of the world's poorest people in Syria, Afghanistan, Haiti, Somalia, and other countries. The UN agency says it's grappling with a 60% shortfall in its funding, the highest in its history. In a new report, the WFP estimates that even a 50% reduction in the assistance it provides people globally could push 23 million more people into emergency levels of acute food insecurity over the next year. The agency warns this could lead to more conflict and unrest as people are forced to take desperate measures to survive. The World Food Program says its food assistance to Afghans, Syrian and Palestinian refugees, and others is often the only thing keeping families from starvation. Aya Batrawi, NPR News, Dubai.
It's being called the biggest antitrust case in decades. Google on trial in Washington today, accused of using its search dominance to stifle competition and to create an online monopoly. Top Google executives and others from tech companies are expected to testify. The Justice Department filed the case against Google nearly 3 years ago. The American cave expert who was rescued from deep inside a Turkish cave early today is said to be doing well. Mark Dickey started suffering internal bleeding more than a week ago and was too ill to climb out on his own. Rescuers from across Europe helped save him. This is NPR News.
Support for NPR comes from EBSCO with EBSCO Community, where libraries and library service providers come together to share ideas around open access, open source, and open infrastructure at communities.ebsco.com. This is NPR.
Good morning, I'm Ann Thompson. This is 91.7 WVXU. Cooler today and a high of 74 with scattered showers, mostly cloudy tonight and a low 54.
Support comes from Zakira's Garage, specializing in repair, modification, and rejuvenation of classic and enthusiast vehicles for over 25 years. Located in Blue Ash, Zakira's works on vehicles from the 1900s to the 2000s with a special focus on Porsche sports cars and select four-wheel drives. You can check out zakiras.com or call for an appointment.
This is 1A. I'm Jen White. It's a race against time to find survivors in the aftermath of the 6.8 magnitude earthquake that hit Morocco Friday night high in the Atlas Mountains. The Moroccan government has mobilized the military and accepted government aid from just four countries: Spain, Qatar, Britain, and the United Arab Emirates. But for many families in Morocco, help is too late. Those are the sounds of another body being discovered from under the rubble in a small hamlet in the Marrakesh region. Friday's earthquake, the strongest in Morocco in more than a century, has killed at least 3,000 people and injured thousands more. The death toll is expected to rise, and the United Nations estimates that more than 300,000 people have been affected. Joining us now from the town of Enlil in the Atlas Mountains is Alice Morrison. She's a resident there and author of the book Walking with Nomads. Alice, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Also with us is Mustafa Akçılak, Turkey County Director at the Zakat Foundation of America. That's a nonprofit organization that conducts humanitarian assistance programs in more than 50 countries around the world. Mustafa is in Marrakesh today. We're so glad you could join us.
Thank you so much.
First, Mustafa, what is the relief work that the Zakat Foundation is doing right now in Morocco?
Right now, actually 2 days ago, when we arrived at Morocco, we prepare food packages and we start to distribute these food packages to people who are living in villages in the middle of this mountain.
Alice, you live in a village very close to the epicenter of the earthquake in the Atlas Mountains. It's been more than 4 days since the earthquake hit. What has life been like since Friday?
It's been a real roller coaster. Obviously, in the immediate aftermath of the earthquake, first of all, we're all terrified. There's a huge amount of shock. There's so much to do, you know, find people, dig through the rubble, get the injured to hospital, bury the dead, get housing for people, set things up. So I think in the immediate aftermath, there is so much to do. And now, several days on, you begin to realize what's happened. It begins to actually sink in.
We heard Mustafa say they're distributing food to those who are affected. What's the current situation where you are? What resources do you have access to? What do you need access to?
I think this is a very interesting question because actually this is very localized and it's so different in a different valley. So I'm in Imlil. We were in the earthquake. Our houses have all got big cracks in them, but we were lightly affected. And the villages on the route down to Asni, which is the main local town where this big aid centre now, is on each side I could see that villages had some destruction, but there wasn't the kind of total destruction that you have in one of the next valleys, which is the Ijukak Talat Valley. And that is where you see the mass destruction. So for us, we don't actually need anything. It's a very self-sufficient community here. It's mountain people, they have small farms, they have goats, we have water, and the military has unblocked the road, we have our electricity back and our signal. But when you go to the badly affected areas, of course, I'm sure they need everything. And we're all starting as well to now think, you know, a week ahead, 2 weeks ahead, because winter is coming, and winter in this area is brutal.
Mustafa, you were up in the Atlas Mountains today. What did you see?
Actually, we were so close to the center of earthquake. It's just 2 kilometers or 3 kilometers away. There was a village, and there was nothing. There is no clean water resources. There is no tent. There is no clothes, and they lost everything. All buildings collapsed in that region, and it was terrible when I see that atmosphere. And they were trying to dig out what they have in their houses. So yeah, I saw these things in there. So they need everything in there right now. They are living like nomad in their territory.
Alice, you told our producer that some of the hardest hit hamlets are cut off from roads and communication. From what you can see, what type of aid has been reaching people in these hard hit areas?
Well, it's exactly like my colleague just said there, and thank you to the Zakat Foundation for the amazing work they're doing. You know, where a village has been destroyed in that way, people need everything. And where the village is poses a lesser or greater logistical problem for the authorities and the aid workers and the charities, because if your village is 2 days walk away from the nearest road and you've had no communications, A, it's unknown whether that village has been hit or not, and B, it's 2 days from the road and people have to get there. Helicopters have flown all overhead. I know that the government and the aid agencies and the search and rescue teams have been studying Google satellite maps, because from there you can see destruction. But it is, I'm sure my colleague will agree with me, it's the geography of the Atlas Mountains that is hindering things so badly. You know, a tiny hamlet with 4 families in it, if it's just completely destroyed, people have absolutely nothing and they need absolutely everything. And these tiny scattered communities are everywhere.
Mustafa, what types of challenges does the topography present for your organization as you're trying to get aid to people who need it?
Yeah, actually, she's right. There's too many mountains, and because of earthquake, many types of size of rocks fall down to the road, so you cannot easily pass to these villages, and you don't know where is the other villages, because these are so tiny roads, and it's really hard to pass these roads, and we don't know the geography in here, so we don't know where is the villages. There is only 10 families living in there. When I reached there, they said nobody come here until you come. So I understand that it makes us terrible to find these villages. So it makes this is hard thing, I think, in this territory.
The traditional homes in these areas of the Atlas Mountains have long been a popular site for tourists traveling to the mountain from Marrakesh. The traditional mud brick, the stone, the rough wood, they're often built by the families themselves without any architect's help, and with extensions added when they can. Alice, how are people that you've spoken to so far talking about the process of rebuilding their homes? Are they fearful?
Well, I live in a Berber family. I live in an Amazigh family. There's 4 families and me in my little house. My little house is the only modern one, and it's not got a crack in it. All of my neighbours, we live in a compound, so all of my fellow compound members, all of their houses have got big cracks in them. And these families, they're still living in a tent because they're too frightened to come back in. They come back in for supplies and to have tea with me, but they're too frightened to come back because there are these big cracks. So I think, we're slightly waiting. The gendarme have told people in my village not to go back and sleep in their homes, and we're waiting for a bit more directive. And also the king has said that he will send in structural engineers into the villages to check whether a house needs to be destroyed and rebuilt or mended, and that's really a stage that needs to happen relatively quickly, because my neighbour Rashida, who has 5 children and her cow downstairs that she has to come and look after every day, she came in today for morning tea and bread with me, and I said, Rashida, how are you feeling? She said, oh Alice, I'm longing to go home. I miss my home. I just want to be in my home. And some people their homes are gone, but even those who have homes can't go back to them.
Mustafa, as efforts move from recovery and relief to building, what are the priorities for the Zakat Foundation?
Actually, as you know, I came from Turkey, and we face kind of earthquake in Turkey too. So what we did first time we just try to distribute basic needs like hygiene kits and food packages and this kind of thing. And the second part is in this process we establish in Turkey tent village, and maybe it can be a second process. And the first process is emergency action. We are distributing food package, jam package, or something like that. Then second phases of earthquake, we are establishing, generally we are doing it, establishing tent village and distributing tent or something like that we are doing. And the third part, what we did in Turkey, we established a psychotherapy center for the whole city. We are working like that in the region.
Alice, very briefly, once aid crews and soldiers leave, the challenges facing hundreds of thousands who call the area home will remain. This is your home now, and you'll remain there. How are you looking ahead?
Well, I and my community are definitely looking ahead to mending the houses, and also to the economic realities of life. Life, when you wake up from the horror and the immediacy and the drama, then you realize that your life is actually worse than it was a week ago, and people have to earn money to live. This whole region, the Atlas Mountains, is famous for its tourism, rightly so. So that is a huge issue for people. They're saying we hope that people will still come because it has been quite localized, and they want people to come and visit. And to help us, in a positive way, as I'm sure Turkey did too.
Well, we'll have to leave it there, but we'd love to check in with you again. That's Alison Morrison, author of Walking with Nomads and a resident of the Atlas Mountains in Morocco, and Mustafa Akçalek, the Turkey country director at the Zakat Foundation of America. I'm Jen White. This is 1A from WAMU and NPR.
Today at 1 on Fresh Air, Allison Jones. She's a casting director widely credited with finding the actors who ushered in a new era of comedy. Her credits include Barbie, The Office, Parks and Recreation, Curb Your Enthusiasm, Arrested Development, Freaks and Geeks, and more. Today at 1 on Fresh Air.
Support comes from York Vision, a business powered by 3 fully licensed opticians located across from Kenwood Town Center, offering positively the most flattering shapes and colors from independent frame designers, as well as chemistry custom magnetic sun clips for most pairs of eyewear. More online at yorkvisionkenwood.com. Fashion for faces.
Support for WVXU comes from the Charles H. Dater Foundation, which preserves the philanthropic commitment of Charles and the memory of 4 generations of the Dater family by making grants that enrich the lives of children in greater Cincinnati. More information at daterfoundation.org.
I'm Lucy May. On the next Cincinnati edition, the new COVID boosters are on their way, just as a wave in cases has hit as the season for peak respiratory illnesses approaches. We'll discuss how well the booster will protect against the new variant and what vaccines you should get this fall. Plus, we'll explore how patriarchies became embedded in societies around the world. Today at noon on Cincinnati Edition on 91.7 WVXU.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Viking, dedicated to bringing travelers to the heart of each destination by river and ocean, offering programs designed for cultural enrichment and immersive experiences on board and on shore. Viking.com. From the Union of Concerned Scientists, championing science for a healthy planet and safer, more just world. Learn more at ucsusa.org. And from listeners like you who donate to this NPR station.
This is 1A. I'm Jen White. What does it mean to be a first-generation child? Well, we pose the question to you.
Hi, this is Adriana from Chicago. I am a child of immigrants and somewhat of an immigrant myself. We moved to Mexico during our formative years and then returned to the United States. When living in the United States, I had to translate for my father as he was primarily Spanish-speaking. And when we lived in Mexico, I had to translate for my mother as she was primarily English-speaking. Children of our generation, of my generation, were interpreters, lawyers, accountants to our parents. I find that it's the same with my group of friends.
My name is Harry. I live in Florida, and I am a child of immigrant parents. I grew up myself, and I became a citizen. But as growing up, you learn the customs of the Americans, and the one thing that I learned is identity is the biggest issue, because there's a Spanish saying, ni de aquí, ni de allá, meaning that you're neither from here nor from there. So identity is either, the one factor that we, have to deal with, because once you behave as such, you identify as such, then you will behave as such.
While we can only know the most intimate part of our lives, there are some overarching themes that can unite the experience of first-generation kids. Alejandra Campoverde tried to find a way to explore those themes in her book, First Gen. The book is out today, and Alejandra is with me in studio to talk about it. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me, Jen.
And we want to hear from you, too. If you're the child of someone who immigrated to the U.S., what was your life like growing up? Email us at 1a@wamu.org or leave us a message with our app, 1A Vox Pop. Now, Alejandra, I saw you nodding along to those voicemails. Sound familiar?
Yeah, that's absolutely the reason why I felt compelled to write this book, because those stories are so widespread and common, and I just don't feel like we talk about them enough.
Yeah. Did you recognize growing up that you were having an experience that was shared by others, or did it feel very much like I am the only one going through this right now.
That's the interesting thing about the first gen experience, which is how widespread it is, yet how isolating it feels. And I absolutely thought it was just me. There was something wrong, there was something broken. And as I got to a point in my life where I was able to look back and start unpacking everything that happened, that's when I realized, wow, and speaking to students and young people, there's so many of us. And when we connect on those shared experiences, everyone feels better.
It's not just about the first. It's also about being the only. You use that term, first and only, quite a bit in the book. What does that mean for you?
Well, I purposely expanded the first gen kind of definition in my book because it is technically a memoir, but like I often say, it's more of a broad examination of the emotional toll of social mobility for first generation young people. And a lot of times people think that only means first generation to be born of immigrant parents. But this experience is first generation to break out of a cycle of poverty. Students, first generation professionals, there are tentacles of this experience of being a trailblazer that touch many of us with different kind of boxes that we check, and many of us check many of the boxes or all of them. And so I wanted to broaden this so that we could talk about this across races and ethnicities, across genders, and really look at where we all have this experience in common and how validating that experience for ourselves and for others can be a big part of our healing.
You attended Harvard, you were an aide in the Obama White House, a Democratic candidate for Congress. If someone looked at your resume, they would say, oh, Alejandra is a trailblazer. How comfortable is that title for you? How do you wear it?
Well, honestly, that was one of the reasons also I wrote the book, because I would be introduced after this life of a lot of ways white knuckling it through these experiences, and then you get to the point where they introduce you by 5 glossy bullet points, and you're like, I don't feel like I'm telling the full story. And when I say telling, a lot of times this would be speaking to students, and speaking to pipeline programs and so on. I started feeling like it was so incomplete. And so in a lot of ways, this book is about lifting that veil of success and smashing that picture the way that only we can about our own stories. And not saying that these things weren't wonderful experiences, and I'm so grateful for having had the opportunity to have these experiences. And a lot of times when you're having a really joyful experience, it's mixed with some sadness or some pain or some guilt, and where is that all coming from? Why is it so nuanced and confusing? So let's look at that, and in the way that we can uniquely do that for our own lives and kind of smash those pictures.
Tell us about your family, the family you remember in your youngest years.
Well, my family immigrated from Mexico a few years before I was born. My mom was a single mother, and at times we were on public assistance, and a lot of us were smushed together in an apartment when I was growing up, about 7 of us in a 3-bedroom at some times. And the reason why I share that is because there was a lot of love, not a lot of resources, and I was raised by kind of a community of many women and one man, my grandfather. And so that has fingerprints all over my experience, and to this day we all live in Los Angeles together also, not in the same apartment anymore, but in the same city. But a part of looking back at this experience was you can't really untangle all of the ways that your family has touched you, and the way that their kind of generational cycles have touched you, which is something I go into the book. The invisible inheritances that predate us, and the ones that we decide that we want to continue, and the ones that we decide we rather disrupt.
When you think about those invisible inheritances, and you examine your mother's experience and your Tia's experiences and your Abi, your grandmother's experience, and your grandfather as well, what did you learn about what it meant to be successful from them?
It's interesting because there was a lot of surviving going on when I was growing up. And there wasn't a lot of sitting around and talking about what success looks like, what to do. It was a lot of getting by. And I think that through my experience, you know, we've kind of all walked that path together, but it wasn't so much, and this is something I always validate to young people when I speak to them about this too, it isn't so much about always getting that validation in real time from your family, because a lot of times they don't really understand what you're going through and how best to show up, and they're excited for you. And my mom always tells me I'm living vicariously through you. But Jen, honestly, that's also a part of the guilt, because you don't want your family to experience success through you. You want them to experience these things for themselves, right?
Yeah. It's interesting when we think about pop culture portrayals of immigrant families in the U.S. and the way they push their children to, you've got to be a doctor, you've got to be a lawyer. What I'm hearing from you is that there was a different experience for you in some ways, and it was about maintaining this foot in two worlds, but one of your feet was like in a roller skate, so you were sort of getting stretched out.
That's an interesting way to put it.
The further along you went, does that resonate?
Yeah, I mean, this is something I talk about in the book, that I would be asked, you know, how do you bridge these cultures? How do you bridge these social classes? How do you bridge these things? It feels impossible. And what I always say is, you are the bridge. You're the bridge. You know, you don't have to do anything. Those things are already inside you, but man, you get stretched out.
Yeah, and it comes at a price.
Absolutely.
Okay. 72 degrees. Nice and cool. Ooh.